No one has shone a brighter light on corruption at Eskom than André de Ruyter, the former CEO. He had to leave South Africa for his own safety, but he's speaking to us today from the United States. Welcome, André.
Hello, Chris. Good to be with you.
André, in your opinion, what progress has been made to deal with corruption at Eskom since your expose?
I think, Chris, the public pressure that arose as a result of my making public the very real issues confronting Eskom, and of course, it wasn't a big bang revelation. I've been complaining and bringing this issue to the attention of the authorities, the police, the Hawks, and various other entities, including Parliament, for almost the entire duration of my tenure. But when I went public with, first of all, the Larson interview, and then secondly, with the publication of my book, I think it became apparent to many people that there were some very real and systemic issues that created an environment in which corruption could flourish. And when this became public, obviously there was a significant outcry, and I think we saw some action. We saw, for example, soldiers being deployed to protect infrastructure, how that was intended to counteract the pervasive effects of corruption. One wouldn't know. There were changes made to the senior command structures of the police in Mpumalanga. Now, typically, this is done when there is, let's call it, a lack of diligence in pursuing investigations into crime. So those changes were made. That's very encouraging. And then we saw an investigation by SARS into tax that wasn't paid by people who are alleged to be coal thieves, who operated these black sites where coal intended for Eskom was replaced with very low-grade coal just barely above rocks, which was then provided to Eskom. And it's interesting that it was the tax authorities that took the lead in collecting some of the amounts that they claim are due to them, rather than law enforcement. We did see some actions where some of these black sites were raided, but we're really talking about the tip of the iceberg here. I think there were some of the truck drivers who were arrested, but these are the operators, these are the foot soldiers. And the bigger networks, I don't think have been properly investigated and pursued. I don't think that we've seen the arrests of people controlling these networks, and therefore my supposition, based on what I know and what my information is that the corruption continues by and large unabated, which of course is very concerning and plays a very considerable role in the continued lack of reliability of the coal generation fleet. But I think there are also some underlying factors that create an environment where corruption is enabled. And some of this relates to the procurement policy that is in place at all government departments and at all state-owned entities. And this relates to preferential procurement, which gives the opportunity for non-value adding intermediaries to insert themselves in the process and add very substantial margins on top of what the market price would be if you bought equipment, consumables on the open market through a competitive bidding process. And those margins, I think, add significantly to the cost of electricity. They add to the cost of doing business in South Africa, but they also detract from being able to run an efficient business. If any business had to inflate its procurement bill by 20, 30, maybe more percent, then you would be in a very challenged financial situation. And again, if you look across the board at our state-owned enterprises, this clearly seems to be the case. So I think corruption will come to an end once some of the ringleaders are arrested and once they've been properly investigated. But I also think that there needs to be a real and substantive look at the underlying factors that give rise to an environment where corruption can flourish. And this includes the way in which the state buys goods and services.
Just to take you back to Eskom, what progress have you seen there to improve the output of a coal fleet?
First of all, I think we need to acknowledge the many good people in Eskom who work very hard and really put in an extraordinary effort. And when I was at Eskom, I was always quite irritated at how the media, sorry if I can criticize the profession that you're part of, how they attacked without understanding people who really put in an extraordinary effort. And I think one needs to look at the underlying factors. I think one needs to look at the fact that the average age of a coal fleet is now more than 45 years old, and we are asking those machines who have been poorly maintained, who have been neglected, who are being fed a diet of undigestible coal, to perform like new pieces of equipment and to have an energy availability factor that is simply not feasible. I always talk about the fact that you don't see many 50, 60-year-old cars driving around on the road, and I would certainly not take my 50-year-old Land Rover to drive down to Cape Town. Why? Not because I don't think that it's a great car, but it certainly is no longer as reliable as a newer car. And to expect that somehow we can patch up these old coal-fired power stations and persuade them to perform at an energy availability factor of 70%, I think that is just not realistic. So the solution is that we need to add more generation capacity as quickly as possible while we try and eke out the last bits of performance from these coal-fired power stations. But the idea that somehow we can resurrect these old plants and breathe second lives into them, I think is just not realistic and just not doable, certainly when you use international benchmarks. There's a very interesting graph that was developed by the American Association of Power Utilities that demonstrated that once a coal-fired power station passes the age of 50, and depressingly, this may also apply to humans. Once you pass the age of 50, you really fall off the cliff, and you need to think about taking things a little bit more easily, which is fortunately what I was able to do.
What are the prospects now for generating new capacity in the context of a draft integrated resource plan?
Many studies have been carried out about the appropriate generation mix for South Africa going forward. And repeatedly, studies by the CSIR, by Eskom, by the University of Cape Town have shown that the lowest cost and fastest way of addressing our generation shortfall is to open up the gates and install as much renewable energy as possible. Now, one of the main objections is that renewable energy only works when the sun shines and the wind blows, but these can be overcome by managing the grid appropriately, by investing in storage. And even if you invest in storage, renewable energy still comes out tops as the cheapest and certainly the fastest way of solving our generation challenge. If you look at the assumption in the IRP 23, you will see that there will not be energy security or electricity security until 2028. Now, that's a very unambitious admission from the policy department that load shedding is likely to be with us for another 5 years. And if you look at the hugely detrimental impacts that a lack of performance from our electricity system has had on our economic performance, on our economic growth, which again, the IMF has calculated that we'll be lucky if we exceed 1% economic growth for the current year, then to wait for another 5 years to solve this problem when the solution is to hand, talks to me about a dogmatic adherence to forms of generation that are not environmentally friendly, that are more expensive, and which we will struggle to finance. And in addition, will make it very difficult for our exporters to compete internationally. The European Union has already started to implement its carbon border adjustment mechanism. Many people in South Africa are upset by it. People in the so-called global south view this as an unwarranted attack on our God-given right to burn all the fossil fuels we want. And that may all be true. But fact of the matter is that our major international trading partners are going to penalize economies that have a higher carbon content in the makeup of their electricity systems. And that very definitely is South Africa. We are double the global average in terms of carbon intensity of our economy. So to my mind, there's an opportunity in the IRP to do two things: to accelerate the decarbonization of our economy by rapidly enabling new investments in renewable energy. The private sector has already demonstrated the willingness to invest and invest at scale without the need for government subsidies, so no burden to the taxpayer. And then we can solve for our electricity crisis by adding new generation capacity as quickly as possible. So the answer is so abundantly clear that one struggles to understand why IRP 23 came up with a different answer than all the modeling work by the entities that I mentioned indicated a completely different answer.
But what are the implications for South Africa if it doesn't speed up its decarbonization efforts?
I think we're going to find ourselves increasingly isolated from an export perspective. You already will have seen that, for example, the Hillside smelter in Richards Bay reached an agreement with Eskom in terms of which it will buy electricity generated from Coburg. Now, why from Coburg? Coburg is carbon-free. And it's very clear from public pronouncements by South 32, the owner of the Hillside smelter, that they were encountering significant challenges in marketing aluminium produced with electricity that has a very high attributed carbon footprint. So these challenges, these competitive challenges, will just increase. We already know that major motor manufacturers who export vehicles predominantly to trading partners in Europe are finding that they need to plan for green energy, low carbon, zero carbon energy. And again, we can rail against the injustice of it all. We can say, well, the global north consumed the globe's carbon budget by growing their economies on fossil fuel. And that's all true, and that's all valid. But it doesn't change the direction in which the world is going. So for us to remain competitive as an export economy, I think it's absolutely crucial that we maintain the tempo of decarbonization, which to some extent was precipitated by Eskom's poor performance from its coal generation fleet.
Andre, if I may ask a personal question, what are your future plans?
Chris, eventually I'd like to return to South Africa. Much as I'm enjoying my time in the US, it's a really enormous privilege for me to be able to teach at Yale. I find the experience hugely rewarding, hugely stimulating. I talk to some very, very bright faculty and students, and it's certainly forcing me to think very long and hard about some of my assumptions that I've had about climate change and how the world is going to work in future, which is great. So it's a great learning opportunity for me as well. But much as I enjoyed that, South Africa is still home. I absolutely love the country and its people, and it's the place that I'd like to return to when the situation warrants it. So those definitely are my longer term plans.
Your bombshell memoir flew off the shelves, and it's still one of the most talked about books in this country. Do you have another book in you? Maybe a More Truth to Power?
There's only so much truth that you could speak to power, and then power should listen. What I do think is required is a book possibly that sets out the case for enabling very substantial capital flows from the global north to the global south to enable developing economies to grow, but grow in a low carbon way. If you look at the way in which the global financial system is currently structured, to invest in a new generation plant in anywhere in Africa south of the Sahara comes at a cost of capital that is 10 times that applies to countries in the global north, which leads you to the quite bizarre situation that the country with the highest solar capacity installed per capita is the Netherlands. Now, having lived in the Netherlands, I can tell you that if you had to pick a country that is less suited to solar panels on roof, you'd struggle to come up with a better candidate than the Netherlands. It's overcast, it's grey, it's cloudy, it's rainy. But yet they massively roll out solar generation. And if I look then at what is happening in Africa and the energy poverty that characterizes Africa and the lack of opportunity for economic growth due to the fact that the average African consumes less electricity on an annual basis than an American refrigerator does, which is a mind-blowing statistic, then we will never address the problem of poverty in the developing world if we do not allow some way of enabling those financial flows to take place. Now, this is very difficult. It's very controversial. Many people have broken their heads about this problem, but maybe there's a solution to the offing, and that certainly would warrant something to be published. So that's what my thinking is at the moment. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Don't start putting in your pre-orders at exclusive books as yet. But it won't be
Sorry, I'm sure your publishers will be very excited when they hear you say this.
Yeah, I'm. Don't. It certainly won't be as racy a read as my first book. That I can promise you.
Well, as you are only too aware, election fever is raging here in South Africa. Andre, what are your wishes for our country, your dreams?
I think many people are quite depressed about South Africa. They look at South Africa and they say, we are either already over the precipice and free fall, and we're just not noticing it, or we are going to fall over imminently. And maybe I am opening myself up to accusations that I'm a Pollyanna, that I'm perpetually optimistic, that I think that somehow there is a bright future to be had. But I feel like if I look at the resources that we have in South Africa, both natural and human, surely we can do better than we're doing at the moment. Surely with appropriate policies, we can attract foreign direct investment that will create jobs, that will create economic growth. But if we can't even approve a single mining permit in a year, and with mining that should be one of the major contributors to our economy, what hope do we have of being competitive in a global economy where investors have a lot of choice? But fortunately, I think these are solvable problems. They are not intractable. And my wish would be that political parties start positioning themselves not as what they're against. Everybody is against corruption. Everybody's against unemployment. Everybody's against the lack of economic growth. We know all that. And most political parties are against the ruling party. But start telling us what you are for and how you intend to achieve that. Because I think that my wish would be that would sway the electorate to create a vision, if you will, of what is possible in South Africa, because the opportunities certainly are there. And in my interactions with people who manage some pretty serious amounts of money that they move around the world, they see South Africa the same way. They shake their heads. They say, this country has so much opportunity. Why aren't you using it? And if we can get appropriate political leadership that will open up those opportunities, and a civil service that actually does its job without asking for lunch money, we can make a difference. We can counteract the prevailing African stereotype of failure, economic failure, and corruption.
Thank you. That was André de Ruyter speaking to BizNews. I'm Steyn. Thank you, André.
Thank you, Chris.